Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we are ranking the top 5 Primarch duels of all time. Which of the epic contests out there are the greatest? Obviously a spoiler warning for today, as I will be discussing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe, and in particular the Horus Heresy series. And before we jump in, there are no right or wrong answers here. As always, just our own opinion. Agree, disagree with my rankings, drop your own thoughts and rankings in the comments below. Because let's be honest, none of us will probably have exactly the same top 5. We all enjoy and interpret the lore differently. So as always, drop your own thoughts in the comments below. And I gotta say, what an impossibility this one was. Even just trying to get it down to 5 was a nightmare, as we've been blessed with some absolutely epic Primarch on Primarch encounters over the years. From the days of the Crusade all the way to current 40k. And there's a ton of honourable mentions here, but I had to draw the lines somewhere. And well, it was hard, but I managed it. So, without further ado, in 5th place, I have Jaghatai Khan vs Mortarion, the rematch on Terra. Now, their first fight in the ruins of Prospero was something to say the least, but this was on a whole nother level. It's not just the fact that the two had that history, a history that had been begun and built throughout the Heresy series, but it's that it's such a unique fight in its own right too. It has meaning. It's a pivotal, iconic moment within Heresy lore, the White Scar's recapture of the Lion Gate spaceport. And it's the end of Jaghatai and the White Scar's story, an absolute masterpiece of craftwork by author Chris Raitt. Of all the legions, no other has truly felt like they've been on such a journey. Such trials and sacrifice, such development, and it has all led to this moment. This confrontation between Jaghatai and Mortarion. And it doesn't play out remotely as you'd expect it to. Jaghatai, up against monumental odds against Mortarion, doesn't dance as it were, doesn't use his speed. Instead he stands there and takes it, taunting Mortarion the entire time, taking everything the demon-ascended Primarch could throw. I remember reading it for the first time on absolute tenterhooks, wondering what on earth was going on, as Jaghatai just continued to get battered from pillar to post, his body just being absolutely broken, shattered by Mortarion. And it's then, just as it seems it's all over, Jaghatai finally begins to dance, to be the Warhawk we all know. And it's one of only 2 moments on this list that genuinely had me literally unable to sit still in my chair, as the realization dawns on Mortarion that Jaghatai has played him. And Jaghatai would have to give his life to save Terra, the throne world, from Mortarion's grip, but he would win, slashing his corrupted brother's throat, banishing him to the warp. It's magnificent, and it's the perfect end to the White Scar's tale of sacrifice. The unknown legion, doubted by all, and yet a legion and Primarch who would give everything they had in the name of the Emperor. If you've never read the Siege of Terra novel Warhawk, make sure you read the White Scar's Heresy journey first, with the Heresy novel Scars and The Path of Heaven. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. Next, in fourth, I have Rogal Dawn versus Alfarius. Now, I can't help but think the older Primarch fights in the Heresy series get a little overlooked or overshadowed by the more recent ones, especially now thanks to the Siege of Terra. However, you would be very wrong to let that happen. The duel between Rogal Dawn and Alfarius is nothing short of epic. The novel Praetorian of Dawn does a great job of seeding the history and backstory between the two, the relationship and conflict between them, building up to the fight as the novel progresses. And it's a fantastic setting in its own right. The Alpha Legion seeking to claim Pluto within the solar system, with the Loyalist forces being none the wiser, bringing the reality of the heresy to the throne world and the Praetorians' doorstep. And the clash begins in epic fashion, Rogal teleporting in to face Alfarius at the head of his Terminator-clad Huskarls. And as Alfarius attempts the usual Primarch greeting and discussion, the interplay we've all come to expect, Rogal simply utters "fire," and all hell breaks loose. It's the only word Rogal utters in the entire encounter, completely and utterly silent, as the two Primarchs go toe to toe, surrounded by warring Terminators of both legions. And Alfarius gives a good account of himself, really coming across as devastatingly lethal with his spear, wounding Rogal to the shoulder early on. And that's the subtle brilliance of this duel, because on later reading, it dawns on you, no pun intended, that Rogal learns from taking this blow, and uses it against Alfarius moments later, intentionally allowing another blow to the shoulder, but this time tanking it, grabbing hold of the spear to disarm his brother. And Rogal just brutally brings his chainsaw down through Alfarius's wrists, slicing off both his hands, following it up by hacking his brother through the chest, removing the spear from his own shoulder, and then slamming it into Alfarius, and then ending it all by driving his chainsaw through Alfarius's skull. It is the most brutal and clinical Primarch death of the Heresy, all again somehow elevated by the ice-cold silence of Rogal, refusing to talk to his traitor brother. And it's a moment that takes its toll on Rogal mentally, emotionally, as can be seen in his later reunion with Vulcan. But my word, what a fight it was. Moving on to number 3, we have Leman Russ versus Magnus the Red. Now, this one undoubtedly holds a special place in my heart. It was the novel A Thousand Suns, reading Magnus's story, that really got me through a tough time in life. Diving into that novel on the train to and from the hospital when my mum was in a coma. And it was my first Heresy novel as well. So I freely admit I may be a little biased with this one. But I don't think that takes anything away from the duel itself at all, because the impact of this was monumental. This was where it all changed, where Magnus was broken. The Emperor was doomed to the throne. And oh boy, this is an emotional one. You spend the whole novel following Magnus and his legion, bonding with them, admiring them, respecting them, wincing at Magnus's mistakes, his moments of unparalleled arrogance, knowing where it's all going to go. And you're there, as he lovingly tries to save Horus from corruption, as he loyally decides to warn his father. And you're there, as the doom of the Space Wolves descends upon him. And there are few, if any, fights that rival this one for emotion, as Magnus refuses to fight against his father's punishment, as Prospero ignites in flames all around them, as Magnus can no longer bear the cries of his sons being slaughtered, and ultimately enters the battle, as Ahriman realises his Primarch knows he cannot win, and the duel between Russ and Magnus is a fight, a real down and dirty fight, with the two Primarchs just tearing absolute chunks out of each other, brawling amid the rain and the mud. And there's some fascinating insights, such as Magnus's psychic power not being as effective against the Primarchs, against Russ. And it's one of those classic both Primarchs coming across as strong situations, with Magnus unleashing his full psychic potential, and Russ just a visceral powerhouse, just keeping on coming, a force of nature, all climaxing in the heart-wrenching moment that Leman Russ snaps Magnus's spine over his knee, dumping the broken Magnus down into the mud. And oh, what an image! The Wolf King snapping the spine of Magnus the Red amid the devastation of Prospero, as the planet itself weeps for its fallen son. If you're a newer fan to the lore, or just have never read 1,000 Suns, trust me, you want to give this a read. It is absolutely fantastic. I'm obviously a Leman Russ fan, and even I felt the pain as Magnus lost everything. It's undoubtedly one of the top 10 novels of the entire Heresy series. There's no doubt about it. But now, on to second. I have Leman Russ versus Horus Lupercal. I have raved about Wolfsbane over the years, and I am not about to stop now. This one was stepping into the unknown. Leman Russ, the Emperor's executioner, going to face the traitor Warmaster. Never have I been immersed within a Heresy story where I just had no idea where it was going to go, where I couldn't believe what I was reading, and I mean completely and utterly apart from this one. Leman Russ leading a suicidal charge into the heart of the Sons of Horus fleet, boarding the vengeful spirit, fighting his way through the halls to face the Warmaster, in a piece of lore we had never even remotely heard a tease of. It was truly heading into uncharted waters. A reunion of the first two found Primarchs. And it's set up perfectly, showing us Horus meeting his first ever brother at the start of the novel, the dismay Horus feels in the Emperor's joy and pride in another son, and the natural jealousy Horus immediately felt at having to now share his father's attention. And then the two stand face to face, all those years later. You can't help but feel the weight of the moment, the history, the connection, the emotion, as Russ appeals to his brother to return to Terra, his legendary mask failing him in the moment. And the fight. The fight is electric. Russ at his absolute executioner best, wielding the Emperor's spear against the chaos-corrupted Horus, having to rely on the speed advantage for once, unable to match the warp-infused Horus for strength. And Russ doesn't need to win, he just needs to wound him to let the Emperor's power do its work. And it's devastating. Our first sighting of what Horus would go on to be. The War Master well on the path to the Emperor-beating power he'd become. Immediately clear to Lehman, Horus has become a monster. Something entirely different to the man, the brother he once was. And yet despite it all, Russ accomplishes his task, taking the blows and punishment necessary to get close to the War Master, inside his guard, plunging the spear into his brother's side. And I cannot describe the shock of that moment. The first time ever reading the lore, I literally leapt out of my chair, unable to sit still, in complete and utter astonishment at what was going on. And I was listening to the audiobook version for that first time too. And it's got to be one of the best ever performances by the legendary Jonathan Keeble, just packing it full of emotion as Russ stands over the kneeling War Master, the kneeling Horus Lupercal. Quite simply, no duel in the lore has ever had me feeling like this one did. It was simply astounding. But in number one, a duel that, honestly, was either going to take the number one spot or not even make the list at all, I have Sanguinius versus Horus. I know. I can hear the cries for Sanguinius versus Angron. And yes, that's an epic moment in its own right. A beyond epic moment, no doubt. Sanguinius ripping Angron's brain out. The definitive showcase for Sanguinius I remember calling for years and years ago. A deserved highlight. But there's tons of epic duels I've had to leave off. That's why it's so hard to do this ranking. L. Johnson vs. Kurz, another one for example. Another beyond legendary encounter. But in re-listening to both of those standout Sanguinius duels, I just felt so much more emotion and impact in the Horus confrontation. And how could there not be? It had all come down to this. From the very first Heresy novel all those many years ago, we had been waiting for that one Primarch duel. The Angel Sanguinius giving everything he had against the War Master, against his most beloved brother, defiant to the last. It was like reading history, unbelieving that we'd somehow finally got there, that we were witnessing Sanguinius' stand against the fallen War Master, the beyond legendary sacrifice. It wasn't as adrenaline-fueled and pumping as, say, the Lehman-Russ-Horus encounter we just discussed, but the sheer prominence of the moment, it just gave it a sense of myth almost, an unmatchable airness about it. I mean, how on earth did Dan Abnett sit down to write this and the final Emperor confrontation, knowing how much they've been longed for? How much they'd mean to all of us. And that goes for all of the Siege of Terror novels in truth. A legacy we can't thank the authors for enough. But we had Sanguinius beginning the duel at his imperious best, defying the wounds and exhaustion. And I remember almost getting heart palpitations at him scornfully telling Horus, "You lack." And your mind's whirling with what on earth is going on here. Your heart filling with that hope that the angel might win, despite everything we know, despite your common sense telling you no. Finding yourself just pleading for the angel to pull off the impossible. And then you get the counter of Horus's perspective, the almost non-human god he's become. the monster. The seeds of emotion, the man and brother he used to be, consumed by the ruinous powers. And the fact that this duel gives us both perspectives, flipping between the Angel and Horus, is fantastic. Not just keeping or relying on the one. And you sense, and you feel, and you live every inch of the effort Sanguinius gives, every blow he inflicts, as he becomes something beyond a Primarch. And you just feel your heart sink, as you realise it's all in vain, as Horus reveals he's been holding back, that Sanguinius is literally fighting the power of the Four. And it's brutal. It is brutal. Sanguinius mercilessly battered, hammered by the War Master, yet never once submitting, never yielding, even when his body is broken, still lashing out to claw Horus with his hands, in one final act of defiance, of loyalty to his father, to mankind. And it's a blunt ending in its way, not a dramatic twist of fortune, or a climactic fit of action, just a punishing, uncompromising death. And so I can understand why perhaps it's not applauded as some others, because it's uncomfortable seeing the Angel end that way. But it had to be that way, because Horus had to face the Emperor. That was the climax, the end of it all. And this duel, in truth, perhaps better than any other, represents the heresy the best, the hope and the tragedy. It's not a duel I'll reread or listen to the most, but it is undoubtedly one that will never, ever lose its meaning, its impact. I re-listened to it in the audiobook version this morning, and my heart still lifted at Sanguinius's taunt, and it was still completely and utterly crushed by the end. The fact you end that duel feeling completely and utterly deflated, well, that just proves what a work of art it is. It is and forever will be 40k history. And it just has to be #1 for me. But as always everyone, what do you think? What are your top 5 Primarch duels? Primarch going against another Primarch. What differences do you have with mine? And what other duels make your personal top 5? And why? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.